and welcome back to our conversation about the conversions of St. Francis depicted in the great Giottos of Assisi. But not just his conversions, but our own call to conversion. We're moving along the great nave wall, and we have about four more to look at before we conclude this series. There are, of course, 28 frescoes, but we're not going to go into the later ones. Maybe we'll come back and do that in another series. But I just want to begin now by turning to number 2. So as we move out of the first fresco, Francis walking through the town of Assisi, now we see Francis is outside the town. He's no longer in Assisi. He seems to be outside, as you can see, surrounded by some hills and some trees. And it looks like to the left there in the distance is Assisi itself, and not clear what the next town above them on the right might be. It might be Spoleto, it might be Spello. But the point is, he's no longer in town. He's outside of town, and the story of his life now is being told, and how God was able to pull him out of himself. Remember the overarching theme of these talks. This is a jailbreak we're talking about. This is liberation from curvitus in se, to a soul that's open and looking not just at God, but at one another. And notice now where he is. In this fresco, he's telling the story in Bonaventure of Francis meeting, as it happens, a knight who is down on his luck. We see this knight doesn't have a proper cloak. And so Francis, again with the halo, but certainly still in a pre-converted state, he's still very much an egoist. He's out on his beautiful horse, and he notices that this poor knight has no cloak. And so Francis offers his cloak. Now, what Giotto is recalling here is not just one moment in the unfolding life of Francis, but many moments. Probably the most famous of which is that moment when Francis encountered the leper. In other words, the first way that God speaks to Francis's heart and moves him out of himself from here now to here is a human being in need. Someone marginal, someone hurting, someone in pain, someone poor. The famous encounter with the leper is supposed to also be in the back of our minds, because this moment on the fresco is all about that moment of Francis encountering in the world something that pulls him out of himself. Last time I told you that we all need that sign, goy, get over yourself. But it's hard to get over ourselves, and it's only sometimes when our heart breaks for someone else that heart breaking for another human being breaks us open. And so this is what happens here. Francis, in his vanity, begins to think of someone else. We know that this was so critical in the life of Francis, because if you know the story, and maybe you don't as well as I'm describing it, but for the Franciscans out there, when Francis wrote at the very end of his life, just a year or two before he died, his great testament, Francis gave the world his own recollection of his conversion. And he says, I'm paraphrasing, when I was in sin, this is the way God came about converting me. This is the way I began to do penance. I began to change the way I thought. When I was in sin, lepers were disgusting to me, and I wanted to look away. But God led me among them, and I had compassion upon them. And what had been so disgusting, what I had so much rejected, became for me sweetness and light. Wow. That's the power of compassion. That's the power of a human heart that's stuck on itself, finally meeting someone else that's in greater need. And you move out, and in that moving out of yourself, you encounter God. I think now, my brothers and sisters, of perhaps my favorite moment of my favorite musical, Les Miserables. And at the famous end of that musical, Jean Valjean realizes that every time you love another person, you see the face of God. And so in this night down on his luck, Francis begins to see God, begins to realize that the center of his life is not him, and that when you decenter yourself, you find the true center. When you get over yourself, you find the true self. And of course, Jesus told us this, right? If you want to find your life, you must lose your life. If you want to save your life, you must give your life away. And so even in this second great fresco, Francis is beginning to understand what it takes to encounter Jesus and to be set on the path of true liberation. We encounter the Lord when we're moving out of ourselves into that world of the other, when we're letting go of our own preoccupations and being emptied of that self, so that now what really matters is that person in front of us. So, let me leave you on this episode with a few questions. In Francis, Christ first came to him through those in need, beggars, lepers, even a knight without his proper apparel. How have you experienced special moments of compassion? When have you been led to respond, perhaps against your will, to those in need? I think you have to think about that. There's no answer coming forth. It's about time you started doing some compassionate things. Maybe it's about calling a friend that you know is down on his luck, or maybe it's about looking into a person who's isolated and alone. And that action will not feel good when you do it. But I guarantee you, once you've done it, what might have been bitter will become like it was in Francis's mouth, sweet. Because that's the road of compassion. We find the sweetness of caring for others. And so, brothers and sisters, I ask you also to consider that God right now might be trying to convert you in your life through someone there who is a bit of an annoyance. Maybe a leper, somebody you've looked away from for a long time. But it's there in that person that God is sending you an angel, someone to help you get over yourself. I'll see you next time. God bless.